Hello everyone, this is Ashen at brothersinsanity.com, bringing you the fifth and final Diablo 3 character class breakdown. Finally, we've gotten around to the Witch Doctor, possibly the most interesting class yet. I'll start off again by quickly explaining how skills work in case you don't already know. It's much different from Diablo 2 as there are no skill trees or skill points obtained to increase skills at each level. Instead, the player is given 6 slots which your skills will be assigned to. You also unlock runes for these skills that change or buff the ability in some way. The primary skill the Witch Doctor starts off with is called Poison Dart. It's a pretty standard range attack. The Witch Doctor uses a blowgun to shoot a poisonous dart at enemies, which deals damage as normal, with an extra bit of poison damage over 2 seconds. Since this is a primary skill, it does not take mana to use. At level 2, the next ability unlocked is a secondary skill called Grasp of the Dead. A dozen or so zombie arms rise from the ground where the Witch Doctor casts the spell, and slows enemies in its area, dealing a small amount of damage over time to enemies inside. The ability takes 122 mana to cast, which is about 1/4 of the Witch Doctor's total mana, and is great for escaping or kiting enemies. It does have an 8-second cooldown, however, so you can't rely on it too heavily. The next unlock at level 3 is a new primary skill for the Witch Doctor called Jar of Spiders. This is where some people may say the Witch Doctor abilities get strange. The Witch Doctor throws a jar filled with spiders at a target. When the jar breaks, 4 spiders are unleashed and wreak havoc on your enemies. Each spider does a very small amount of damage and they die after about 3 seconds, but as long as you continuously throw jars down, there will always be spiders attacking. The nice thing about this ability is that enemies will stop and attack the spiders as well, keeping them off you. Also, if you throw down Grasp of the Dead, the spiders will occupy the monsters inside the spell and cause them to take more damage over time. At level 4, the Witch Doctor unlocks a new skill slot along with the defensive ability Summon Zombie Dogs. You instantly raise 3 zombie dogs from the ground to fight for you. It only costs 49 mana, but has a whole minute for a cooldown, so if they die before then, you're all alone. It's not very likely the dogs will die though, as they gain back health whenever you pick up a health globe, and they have enough hit points to take a decent beating. The downside is they don't do a whole lot of damage by themselves, so they'll need either Jar of Spiders or Poison Dart to back them up. It all depends on if you want to sit back and watch as your spiders and dogs rip apart enemies, or take a little control yourself and shoot some poison darts in the mix. The next ability unlocked at level 5 for the Witch Doctor is another secondary skill called Fire Bats. The description makes it sound like another pet summon ability, but in actuality it's a damaging spell that you cast, much like a flamethrower. Flaming Bats shoot out from the Witch Doctor and deal a good amount of damage, but in very limited range. It drains mana pretty quickly, but can clear out a large group of enemies close to the Witch Doctor. Level 6 unlocks the first rune for Poison Dart called Splinters. This ability now turns Poison Dart into a sort of 3-round burst. Each individual dart does less damage, but since there are 3 of them, it ends up doing quite a bit more damage overall. The one thing I did notice, whether it was intentional or an issue with the beta, is that there is no longer poison damage over time. It seems like the extra damage makes up for no damage over time though, so I would still recommend using the rune as long as you're using Poison Dart. The Witch Doctor unlocks another rune at level 7, this time for the Grasp of the Dead ability. This rune simply causes the ability to slow enemies even more, making it much more effective. It also changes the animation, so there are no longer hands reaching up from the ground. All the same, it still does damage over time. At level 8, the Witch Doctor unlocks a new defensive ability called Horrify. This spell causes all enemies within 12 yards to flee in fear for 4 seconds. The best use I could find for this was getting out of a hairy situation, which, as long as you have your zombie dogs and other tricks, you probably won't really need it. I used this ability very little and didn't find myself missing it at all. 2 unlocks are available for the Witch Doctor at level 9. The first is a new slot and a terror skill called Soul Harvest. This is where the Witch Doctor becomes deadly. Soul Harvest drains the life force of enemies around the Witch Doctor, giving you a bonus to your intelligence per enemy affected, up to a total of 5 enemies. The bonus depends on the level of the Witch Doctor, but at level 9 it was 28 intelligence per enemy. Since intelligence is the primary attribute for Witch Doctors, the damage dealt is based off intelligence, and is increased by a percentage equal to the number of intelligence. This means that my character went from having 34 intelligence to having 118 after using Soul Harvest on 3 enemies. Now my abilities do an extra 118% damage instead of 34% extra damage, an increase of about 3 times. The ability does have a 15-second cooldown, but it lasts for 30 seconds, so as long as there are enemies around the Witch Doctor, you can continuously keep this buff on you, dealing immense damage with even your most basic abilities. I believe the highest I got my intelligence was 174 with 5 enemies. I wouldn't be surprised to find out this ability gets nerfed shortly after launch. The other ability unlocked at level 9 is a rune for Jar of Spiders called Leaping Spiders. The spiders get much bigger, can quickly cross between enemies, and now do more damage. If you are already using Jar of Spiders, this is a clear choice for a rune as it only improves the ability. Level 10 brings the passive unlocks for the Witch Doctor. The first is called Circle of Life, which gives you a 5% chance to summon a zombie dog when you kill an enemy within 12 yards. You can increase this range with certain equipment in the game that increases your range of the health globe pickups. You cannot have more than the standard 3 zombie dogs though, so if you are hoping to raise an army, you'll be disappointed. This is nice because it means you can use other abilities instead of having zombie dogs take up a slot. However, 5% turns out to not be very often, and the range of 12 yards is a bummer since the Witch Doctor is built to keep her distance from enemies. The other passive ability is called Jungle Fortitude and reduces all damage taken by the Witch Doctor and her pets by 20%. This keeps your zombie dogs alive a little longer during boss fights, but shouldn't affect the Witch Doctor much since you shouldn't be getting hit anyway. Personally, I thought it was better to use Circle of Life since if your zombie dogs did happen to die, you could always bring them back by killing more enemies. The next abilities unlocked for the Witch Doctor at level 11 are Plague of Toads and a rune for fire bats called Dire Bats. Plague of Toads is a primary ability that sends out 3 toads hopping in front of the Witch Doctor. These toads deal poison damage when they run into an enemy and die on impact. They are a bit uncontrollable, and if they hit a wall, they die and are useless, so I didn't use them very often. When I did, they were best used in large open hallways. The rune Dire Bats is a nice change to the ability, as instead of being a flame shooting out from the Witch Doctor, the bats are much larger and travel through groups of enemies. The ability now does even more damage, and when used with Soul Harvest, can wipe out a hallway pretty quickly. The only thing I didn't like about Dire Bats was the strange path it took. At times, it seemed to slightly veer one way or the other, potentially missing enemies. Level 12 brings another new secondary ability and another rune for the Witch Doctor. The new ability is called Haunt and is another damage over time ability, however with a twist. Haunt does a large amount of damage over 12 seconds to the affected enemy, and if that enemy dies while haunted, the haunt will move into another random target nearby. This is really handy for extra damage on boss fights, as well as clearing out groups of enemies as you haunt and kill them. You can keep multiple haunts chaining to multiple targets as long as there are enough enemies around to do so. The rune unlocked is for the ability Summon Zombie Dogs and is called Rabid Dogs. This rune gives the dogs a poisonous bite that deals damage over 3 seconds to enemies they attack. Again, if you're using zombie dogs already, you'll want to use this rune to go along with them right away. The most interesting thing I found about this rune is that it works with Circle of Life ability when you randomly generate a zombie dog. It only works if you have the zombie dog skill as a hotkey though, and if you have the rune chosen. If you have other abilities instead, Circle of Life will generate a normal zombie dog. Finally, at level 13, we're capped out in the beta, and this time the Witch Doctor unlocks 3 new abilities. The first is a terror ability called Sacrifice, which sacrifices your zombie dogs in an explosion, dealing massive damage to any enemies within 12 yards. This move is extremely powerful, but explodes all your zombie dogs at the same time. If you have the zombie dog skill equipped, you'll have to wait for your 60-second cooldown to be up before you can summon more dogs. Or, if you're using Circle of Life, hope that you get lucky and summon some more friends. Even as deadly as this skill can be, I didn't think it was worth the wait for zombie dogs to come around, and I felt like the slots were much more useful for something like Soul Harvest. The next ability is a third passive skill unlocked for the Witch Doctor called Spiritual Attunement. This passive ability increases the Witch Doctor's maximum mana by 20% and regenerates 1% of the Witch Doctor's total mana every second. At the lower levels, mana never seemed to be much of an issue. Since mana regenerated fast enough on its own, I chose to go with Circle of Life most of the time. And the third unlock is a new rune for Poison Dart called Numbing Dart. The dart goes back to doing poison damage over time, but now also slows enemies for 2 seconds as well. While this can be nice, it might not necessarily be helpful depending on what other abilities you're using. With Grasp of the Dead, you should already have enough slowing to keep enemies away from you. If you're using a different ability, then Numbing Dart might be a wise choice for kiting. And that wraps up the Witch Doctor breakdown. In my opinion, it's going to be that one class that very few people want to play, but ends up being the most powerful in the hands of a skilled player. I think it also comes down to how you'll want to play the Witch Doctor. If you want to sit back and watch your minions do everything, or if you want to jump in and get your own hands dirty. I'd also like to take a quick moment to thank everyone for supporting us so far, and just say that if you like what we do, please head over to our website, brothersinsanity.com. Sammy and I have more content there, and now that I'm finished with the Diablo videos, we'll be able to get more reviews and previews up. Be sure to check out the other class breakdowns if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, and see you all in Hell May 15th.